Kia ora koutou. Welcome to the final Geoethics Aotearoa Seminar series of the year. We have a very exciting talk today from Alyssa Thomas, who's just come back from Antarctica. Thanks everyone so much for coming. I'll just note that the Zoom is being recorded, and there will be heaps of time after Alyssa's talk for questions. So feel free to put them in the chat or save your questions till the end, and make sure your microphone is off for the meeting. I'm going to open us up with a karakia and then we'll get into it. Me karakia tātou. Tukua te wairoa kia rere kia ngā taumata. Ai arahi I a tātou mahi. Me tā tātou whai I ngā tikanga a rātou mā. Kia mau kia ita, kia kore ai ngaro, kia pupuri, kia whakamaua, kia tīna, tīna. Huye taiki. Yeah, I want to introduce. Oh, wait, no, we have Pānui. This is our last Geoethics seminar for the year, as I mentioned, but we are going to keep it going next year, aiming to have our first session in March, so keep an eye out on your mailing lists. And also we wanted to put the call out to anyone who wants to get involved, especially students who are interested in geoethics or just generally some of the themes that we've talked about in this series. So yeah, get in touch via the email on screen if you're keen to be involved. But otherwise, we just enjoy having people attending these sessions. I'm now going to hand over to Hannah to introduce this talk.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Hannah, one of the Geoethics Student Committee. I would like to introduce Alyssa, and Alyssa, if you can prepare and then sharing the slide, it would be great timing. So today's speaker is Alyssa, a PhD candidate in the Antarctic Research Centre and Te Kawa Māui at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand. She has just returned from a month of fieldwork at scope-based Antarctica, where she explored how Māori method of tirotiro observation could be applied in a diverse Antarctic environment. Maramataka Māori lunar calendars promotes connection and attunement to our natural environment. Where observing and connecting with tohu signs and indicators serves as guidance for a practice of kaitiakinga, protection, hauora, health, and connection. Today, Alyssa will reflect on her experience from this fieldwork, which she shared with her two supervisors, Dr. Holly Winton and Professor Ocean Mercier. Also, it feels particularly meaningful for us that the first speaker in the seminar series was Professor Dan Hikuroa, who shared his journey from Antarctic research and his early career research to his ongoing work weaving Indigenous knowledge and science together. Now we close to the series with Alyssa, who is at the beginning for her own journey, bringing perspective on how Māori method of tirotiro observation can provide understanding of Antarctic environment. Please join me in welcoming Alyssa.
Thank you very much. Ngā mihi nui mō te whonore o tēnei kōrero. Thank you very much for the invite and the opportunity to share the start of my research. We'll start with who I am. So, ko manaia te maunga, ko whangarei te ringa parao te moana, ko patuharaki ki te hapu, ko takihiwai te marae, ko rangiore te whare tupuna, ko purihi te whānau, ko Alyssa Thomas tōku ingoa. My name is Alyssa and I whakapapa to Whangarei in the North of the North Island, and this beautiful mountain in the picture is Mount Manaia, so that is one of our landmarks of Aotearoa. And it's a big key part of my research as well. So I thought I would start with a bit of a background on my sort of studies and research so far. So most recently before this, which is my PhD, I did a Master of Indigenous Studies through VIC, and it was through a project called Te Whakaheke o Te Wai, which is the flows and pathways of the waters. So it had a bit of a focus on groundwater and freshwater, but with a sort of key theme of informing iwi interests. So it it was a really good opportunity for me to apply it to my hapu, patu harakeke, and bring in this sort of, my project was about supporting rangatahi to reconnect back to our freshwater dam, which is Pukekoti in the photo in the bottom right. And I was supervised by my current PhD supervisor, Ocean Mercier, which was awesome. And that led me to my work now, and sort of between my master's and PhD with the Te Pōtaiao or Patu Harakeke, which is the tile unit of our hapu, and it's sort of just it's the representative group through the trust board, which sort of is just on the ground covering working towards environmental conservation and expressing cultural values. And through that, we're developing our climate change risk assessment sort of toolbox, and also climate change adaptation planning at the moment, which is sort of coming through my PhD too. Other related experiences that have sort of all led me to here is one summer a couple of years ago, I was in Nelson at Cawthorne Institute, and I was part of a project which was looking at, it was sort of applying this concept of Maramataka to the behaviours of green shell mussels, and how we could observe the green shell mussel behaviours and environmental stresses through the lens of Maramataka and through their behaviour with the tides and the moon, to sort of limit the amount of sort of invasive research on the mussels. And also an internship with Girls on Ice NZ through the Antarctic Research Centre over another summer, and that was sort of part of the startup team for bringing the Girls on Ice expedition to Aotearoa. So we worked on the website and some lesson plannings, and yeah, incorporating this mātauranga Māori through the program, which is well up and running now. And another note is that the Girls on Ice was supervised by my other PhD supervisor now, Holly Winton. So I'm really well connected with both my PhD supervisors, which I'm really grateful for. Our current PhD team is made up of myself and my two primary supervisors, Ocean and Holly, and then two sort of advisors, Ayla and Sarah. And we've got this name, Te Ope Tirotiro, which means the explorers, the traveling to Antarctica and examining the environment. So wanting to emphasize as well within this team that it is made up of women, which is really, really awesome. Awesome. So the sort of working draft title at the moment is Navigating a Changing World with Tohu and Maramataka, a decolonial approach to impacts on Aotearoa from Antarctic environmental change. And some of the sort of sub themes within that is what could a Maramataka in Antarctica look like, and then could a Maramataka in Antarctica help inform climate change adaptation in Aotearoa. So kind of bridging the gap between these two places. And some of the important reasonings for this theme and sort of title is long-standing Māori connections and interest in Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. Just sort of recognizing it and acknowledging that it's not new, but and wanting to support our Māori participation in this research. Environmental change is experienced in both Antarctica and Aotearoa and are both influencing each other. Interpreting these changes through a Māori lens is, I find value in this to enhance Māori research and researchers in this space. And there is much to gain from the partnership of Mātauranga Māori and Western science. So kind of acknowledging both worldviews as awesome on their own and even awesomer together. So the context, as I was saying, the closeness of New Zealand to Antarctica is maybe not recognized enough. I think we, and for at my hapu at least, we don't sort of directly understand Antarctica to impact us, but it's kind of the closest place next to us where, and the tohu that I'll talk about, we experience them both, we influence each other. It's very connected, and I want to show that. And then on the right, there's a pin where sort of Patu Harakeke is based. So there's Whangarei on the north of that harbour on the right hand side, and then Patu Harakeke is sort of on the south, but it's very coastal and it has the harbour and the coastline there and the influences of that. So some of the terms through this presentation, Maramataka is the interpretation of the rhythms and patterns of the sun and the stars and the moon and the flora and fauna in a Māori calendar system. So it is commonly understood as the moon or the lunar calendar, but it does actually have all the factors of the sun and the stars and other things as well. Tohu has many meanings, but in this context, it means a sign or an indicator, and it's in the environmental context for this project. And tirotiro is to observe, sense, and attune to the natural environment. The purpose of, or part of the research, is to kind of have a baseline in Whangarei and to develop a baseline in Antarctica and work these data together. So I started in Whangarei, and Mautapapa here is my grandparents' kind of homestead, and it's sort of important to understand that they experience the influence of the tides here. So this is the water at the bottom, and this is the southern end of Whangarei Harbour. They've got the mangroves. They've got the range up behind has fresh water coming down into the harbour. So there's different sort of species that come by. The Mount Manaia is sort of would be on the left of this picture. Yeah, so there's lots of different environmental interactions happening here. And so I'll run through some of the photos and the tohu that I observed from Mautapapa, and also acknowledging that a lot of this was sort of, a lot of my knowledge that I learned here was supported by a course that I recently finished through Mercier, which was called Tata Whetū. And I want to acknowledge Pauline Harris and Rangi Mātamoa, especially for their knowledge shared here. Yeah, which helped me sort of understand these tohu better as well. So the sun is a tohu of the season. So where the sun is rising in the sky changes throughout the year, but it comes in a pattern. So you can see on mid-August, the sun was rising on the sort of northeast end of Mount Manaia, and a month later, it is quite well towards the southeast of Mount Manaia, and that will continue to move southeast until it reaches the summer solstice, and that is the further southeast, and then it will start coming back to the northeast until it reaches the winter solstice. And in between, you have due east at the spring and autumn equinox. So though that's a sort of indicator of where you are in the year, depending on where that sun is rising. Another tohu is the stars, and that's an indicator of the month. So Earth's orbit around the sun will sort of mean that you see different stars rising before the sun, and also the latitude that you're at will change what stars you are viewing. So this is very location specific as well. Terribly blurry photos, but we've got Matariki and Te Kako, which is the Orion's belt and then kind of the wider constellation of the Pot there. And these sort of, the position of these change in the sky as you go throughout the year, but it will come back around again. And that's sort of that indication of the month. And then the moon phases are a tohu of the day. So the moon changes each day, but not sort of on the 24-hour cycle of a day that we know. More the moon phases are sort of observed from moonrise to moonrise, and that isn't necessarily in line with the sunrise. But yeah, they sort of, it'll tell you where you are within a month, and a Māori lunar month is measured between usually whero to whero, so new moon to new moon, but sometimes rakonui to rakonui, which is full moon to full moon, and that's a month. And then where the light is on the moon will tell you whether it's risen before the sun or after the sun, or, you know, rising and setting at the same time as the sun or directly opposite time of the sun. Yeah, it's awesome. It's really beautiful. And then those things sort of influence the behavior of flora and fauna. So depending on where the sun is rising and what the moon's doing will influence what sort of the flowering patterns, the spawning patterns, the migration patterns of all the species that are around in your location. This picture on the bottom right is an audio recording of a Waka Waka call, which I think is very adorable. But yeah, these photos are just captured at the time that I was making these observations at sort of sunrise from Maramataka. And then you've also got tides. So at Maramataka, the tidal cycle is about 6.5 hours from between high tide and low tide. And so you'll get sort of 2 high tides and 2 low tides within a 24-hour cycle. And you'll get different species coming. Sometimes they'll be in the water, sometimes they'll be eating by the water. That's a kōtare, sort of diving from the tree into the water. That is oyster catchers, picking at the exposed shellfish, and swans swimming or kind of sleeping in the water pond. Yeah. So, in understanding all of that, the tohu that would create this calendar system of rhythms and patterns is really different in Antarctica. So where here the sun rises and sets once a day, in Antarctica the sun doesn't set below the horizon for 6 months of the year, give or take, and then the sun doesn't rise above the horizon for the other 6 months. So that in itself is a big difference. Then you also get a lot of time where it's light for the 24 hours. So again, with the stars, the lower latitude means that the star constellations will be different. And also when the sun is above the horizon, you can't even see them. Then the moon is different as well. It's not on its sort of rise and set cycle of a bit less than 24 hours. It is about on a 2-week cycle. So it's above the horizon for 2 weeks and then it's below the horizon and you can't see it. And understanding that Antarctica is experiencing environmental impacts from human-induced climate change, and then Aotearoa is affected by those changes in Antarctica, including sea level rise and ocean temperatures and all the change that comes with those. So my research is looking at what does kaupapa Māori research look like in Antarctica, and what does a decolonial approach to research in Antarctica look like? What does Maramataka look like in Antarctica? Is it appropriate to apply in that space? Could tohu be a focus for connecting different knowledge systems? So those two worlds of Mātauranga Māori and Western science. For example, could tohu complement the notion of tipping points? Could tohu help us recognize indications of change earlier, sort of more specifically in the Antarctic space? And how can tohu guide us to respond to environmental change in Antarctica and Aotearoa to feel a sense of kaitiakinga, which is like responsibility. So just like really quick context of Antarctica, Scott Base is right on the edge of the Ross Ice Shelf, which is permanent structure of ice, and McMurdo Sound, which is open water. The open water sorry, that was a horn. Freezes over winter, and then you get a layer of sea ice, so you don't get the same sort of visual open water outside Scott Base sort of wintertime and into early summer, and then possibly it will break out and it will become open water on the other end of summer. So you get different species that are there. If it breaks out, you might get more orca whales, kind of fish species. Otherwise, there's seal colony there, and penguins can slide by on the ice. And when I was there, it was frozen over, so that it had sea ice. But also with that sea ice, when the tide sort of comes and goes, the sea ice, as it's not attached to anything, it pushes up against the Ross Island, which is this, and it creates pressure ridges. And when it comes up against the land and the pressure ridges sort of come up with which is the sea ice, it creates spaces, and the seals come up and can sort of come up to spend the day, and they can go down and go fishing, and then they can come back up. So it's a good spot for a seal colony just outside Scott Base. Through the field work, when we were there in kind of mid-October to mid-November, we were looking at these 4 key tohu. So tohu rangi, which is tohu of the sky, tohu whenua, which is tohu of the land, tohu moana, which is tohu of the ocean, and tohu pukapapa, which is sea and snow and ice. And so those things sort of included the position of the sun, the moon rising, setting, and the phases when it was visible, the tidal patterns, which, as I said, for Motopapa was sort of on a 6-hour cycle. The tidal patterns here were more or less on a 12-hour cycle, so kind of 1 high and 1 low tide a day instead of 2. The seal behavior, so counting the number of seals, it was the pup season, so there were more pups kind of towards the start, and then they were starting to grow up as I was there, which was awesome. And then wind and weather and snow and ice. Yeah, so these are just some pictures of those things. So this is a picture of the moon set. I think it was the last moon set before it went down for 2 weeks. So we kind of got a few days at the start where it was above the horizon, and it was getting bigger, heading towards full moon, and then it set, and then right at the end of the field work, it started to rise again, but it was really waning towards new moon, so it was not very visible. Then we had seals, and we had the sunset there on the right. We were there in time for the last sunset before the sun didn't set again until about February next year. And these, I'll just go back a slide. These observations were made at various times of the day. A lot of it was guided by those tidal times. So when it was high tide and low tide, we would go out to the pressure ridges and walk them and count, and then sit at the po, the carved po, to kind of attune for 5 or 10 minutes before we got too cold, and write down everything that we were observing. But we were also out when the moon was out. We got our telescope and the camera and just tried to record at any time that we were observing these different things, and also when it was snowing or particular weather patterns. So some of the pictures that we got from observing the moon, it was technically above the horizon when we arrived, but it was basically new moon. So we didn't see it for the first few days. And then we did. And we started capturing it through the telescope and trying to sort of get these images so that we can sort of see the transition quite clearly between each of the moon phases. And this is kind of a picture of the telescope set up, and there's the moon there. And this is like a snapshot of one of the entries on the journal that we were doing. So I chose this day because it was like the first day that we saw the moon, which was really exciting. But it just sort of, we basically record everything that we can see. So I was talking about the day was very clear, bluer sky as the day goes on, light wind, and I'm not wearing many layers, patches of light, see-through clouds. Moon to the east of Mount Terra/Terra Nova. The flag was blowing northerly. The pressure ridges are changing. 26 seals, 6 pups, all quite quiet and sleepy. New pressure ridges developing towards the right. Could see the C-17 plane in the far distance. So a new arrival of people were coming in. The peak of Mount Discovery was just visible out from the light cloud. The sun's nearly directly behind us, like northwestish. Yeah, just sort of as an example of what we were taking. And then what we can do with that is see over time what these observations correlate to and what they are an indicator of when we see them as a pattern. Cool. So data exploration. So now that I've got a month of observations, we are looking at some kind of questions that are coming up and some hypotheses. So does the presence of the moon above the horizon align with greater activity, and vice versa, below the horizon, lower activity? So here, sometimes the Maramataka is interpreted as, very, very generally, more light, more moon has like great gravitational pull and stuff, and you might say that's great at high energy, and then vice versa with the new moon. But they sort of vary between the day. So sometimes within that, there might be one really good day or one really particularly low energy day. Maybe here or there in Antarctica, it's not on the same wavelength. So maybe it's broader than day to day, and maybe it's above the horizon and below the horizon, possibly. Could the Weddell seals be a tohu of tidal patterns at Scott Base? And could the observation of these seals include the detection of unexpected tidal changes or shifts in the patterns? And how does this align to different phases of the moon as another layer on top of that? So we are wondering if the Weddell seal count if there were more of them sort of at low tide versus high tide, because at high tide the water was sort of blooming, it was up higher, there were more it was more accessible for them to go in and out of their holes, as opposed to low tide where it was a little bit more sort of dull and flat and there were more of them on the surface, possibly. And what does this mean? And can we tell what the tide is based on the seals rather than timeanddate.com, possibly? And our current data is both qualitative and quantitative. So it's both like environmental observations of our sensors and also seal counts, and also utilizing the data online and technology to be compared against existing research and literature and information that's already out there. We want to collate this over the seasons, possibly display it in a visual calendar over time, and interpret it in the context of understanding change impacts for Aotearoa and Antarctica, to be fair. Some of the considerations that are ongoing is one particular one whose Maramataka is appropriate to guide us in these early stages. So the thing about the Maramataka is that it's really locally specific. It's like contextual, so it's not necessarily appropriate or accurate to bring the Maramataka of Patu Harakeke or Northland even and put it straight down in Antarctica and expect it to be the same. But yeah, so what can we even use as a reference to be appropriate? How will my local hapu and whangarei be able to connect with a different Maramataka with very different tohu and seasons? So this will be a really key question to answer. That's my goal. But it's a good start to sort of have this research in a consistent Te Ao Māori lens alongside Western science. And yeah, recognising the value of different research methods at Scott Base, including kaupapa Māori and its intersection with Western science. So acknowledging that Scott Base is New Zealand's space in Antarctica. So if there's going to be any space that is appropriate for kaupapa Māori, it is Scott Base. So that's very cool. Yeah. So into the future, we are, well, while we were there, we started to engage with the winter overstaff who will be there from when we were there until this time next year. And we are hoping that they'll be able to sort of carry on these tohu observations and data recording through the winter, and they'll be able to start noting things such as the stars, the aurora, the sun, the last sunset, or the last sunrise before it sets, and then open water possibly as well. So we want it to be, yeah, seasonal rather than just sort of a finite month. Next steps, key learnings from the recent fieldwork is that the Antarctic environment is certainly different, but it's not impossible to observe and interpret. And exploring a new Maramataka in Antarctica is a long-term journey, and we will just be starting the conversation. So certainly won't be ending up with a whole calendar ready by the end of this PhD, but yeah, just sort of getting it going. And future fieldwork will sort of consist of diving deeper into one or two key tohu, for example, the tides or the wind or the seal behavior, or sort of the tides and the seals in line with the moon, perhaps. And then observations at a different time of year to understand seasonal changes. So if we are able to go back, it might be in February instead of October, and continuing to support Māori researchers in the space. Yeah, kia ora. That is the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. If anyone has any questions or any thoughts or things to share, feel free to, oh, Beatrice, go ahead. Just raise your hand or put in the chat. Go ahead.
Hi. Hi, Alyssa. Nice to see you again. We met at SCAR and I really enjoyed it. It's really cool to hear about your trip to Antarctica and the state of your PhD. So thank you so much for sharing your work first. And second, I was wondering, because I'm from Canada, right? So I know different climate and stuff. And so one of the questions that popped into my mind at the end of the presentation is like, in your research, have you looked into like tohu from different indigenous culture, like for instance, the Inuit culture that are more familiar with like climate change, like signs in the Arctic and stuff like that?
Yeah, thank you so much. I remember you as well, so thank you so much for listening. And thanks for the question. At this stage, I haven't really, but I do know that that it would be a really good lead to look into that. We have talked about it and have sort of talked about our aspirations to engage with the Inuit knowledge. So yeah, I think it will be a good space to look into. Yeah.
I have a question. I don't know. I was wondering like what the relationship is between your two places and what like I don't know if you have any like thoughts about how the tohu or the Maramataka in your two sites kind of relate to each other. I don't know if I'm kind of misinterpreting your project. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. That's actually probably a big part that I forgot to mention. So the important part for me is that the hapu in Whangarei is like low-lying coastal community. It's vulnerable to these climate change impacts, and a big part of it is that sea level rise. And so what I wanted to do was have this sort of concept maybe, or tangible thing that will show that, you know, where the sea level rise is coming from. And I know it's not just from Antarctica and it's not that specific, but there is a contributing factor to that. So it is, I want to make it something sort of more understandable and more sort of digestible to our hapu, if we're interpreting the change in Antarctica through a Māori lens rather than just one sort of knowledge system, instead of bringing and sort of just I'm not explaining it very well, but ideally bringing it back to support the climate change vulnerabilities that we have here, knowing that a lot of it is happening down in Antarctica.
Makes a lot of sense. That's really cool. I think we have a question in the chat. A couple of questions from Jeff. One, did you engage with your whangarei hapu before doing this work, and what are they generally interested in? I feel like you kind of started getting into that. And two, how would you extend your analysis of tohu beyond your research? I.e., could you use some historical data / observations?
Yeah. Yes, thank you for the questions. Yes, I have engaged with my hapu. A lot of it is coming through the climate change work that we're doing. So they are interested in what sort of knowledge can contribute to that. A lot of it might be through the tides, which kind of is related to coastal erosion and sea level rise here, or the wind changes as well. We have a lot of historical kōrero about wind from here, and I know that a lot of changes happening with wind down there, so that might be something that we can bring back to help the hapu. And in terms of historical data, yes, we're definitely not limiting this research to what we're finding. I think a lot of it is about what is out there and what we're recording and what we're observing already. Yeah.
Any more questions in the chat or on the Zoom? Jeff says thanks. Okay, if there's no more questions, maybe we'll wrap it up there. Did you have a karakia whakamutunga, Alyssa?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, I'll just first just quickly acknowledge Alyssa, again for your work. Thanks so much for sharing. I think it is, I mean, we're probably biased because us in the organizing committee for this series are Antarctic scientists, but it's been, yeah, as Hannah mentioned, it's been really cool to kind of have started the series with Dan's talk about his journey from very Western kind of Antarctic science and coming to his, mātauranga, and then wrapping it up with the next generation of scientists and your mātauranga in Antarctica. I don't know if you would consider yourself a scientist. That's okay. If not, anyway, I think one thing that I really was thinking about when you were talking about your work, which it just like draws on so much knowledge, which is very cool to me. But it was just about how knowledge is not just about observations and recordings, but it's like kind of can be experiential, and like the knowledge that you're engaging with is so like deep and lived, which is I think very cool and very meaningful. Like I think when it comes to being able to convey that knowledge back to your hauora is really cool. So yeah, everyone, this is our last one for the year. Thanks for coming along and everyone engaging in such an awesome way with this series. We hope to see you next year and continue having these conversations. But yeah, I'll hand it back to Alyssa to close us out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you again for having me and for listening and for the questions as well. So I just have this karakia to close us off, and it's a pretty cool one because it's the karakia that we used in Antarctica each time that we did our observations. So we sort of stood by the po and opened our observations with this karakia, and so I'll close us up with this. Me karakia tātou. Tuia ki te rangi, tuia ki te moana, tuia ki te whenua, ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, tihei Māori ora.
Ngā mihi nui, Alyssa. And thank you to Ocean and Holly for joining as well and for your work in this space.
Of course, absolute pleasure. Ka pai, Alyssa.
Ngā mihi.